你好，Maggie。
你好，丹普桑。
现在完全，
嗯，
我说你现在好了吧？
好了。
好了啊，好好讲。
嗯，Thank you。
呃，我现在点开的是博威医生的这个视频网站，你看得到吗？
看得到。
好，这些你看哈，这些最新的视频呢，你看哈，一两天前的，然后你看啊，从这里啊，胃消化很重要啊，加胃酸杀菌不胀气自然疗法，这是一个了啊。当然最糟糕的减肥餐我们不了哈。然后呢，那还有就是这个全球最糟糕的，诶，我显示我的网络连接不稳定，不知道有没有断了哈。
没有。
最糟食物细胞功能，你看我们这一段时间不一直在学细胞嘛哈，细胞里面的蛋白质啊什么的，然后产生病变，但是这个比较长，有30多分钟、35分钟呢。然后他真是访问一个，我们要不要看这个呢？还是说看一个短的？
嗯，都行，您来决定。
嗯，那这个访谈呢，它一下子就有30多分钟了。那我们先看一下这个吧。
嗯，
好，那我就点开这个啦。
好。
Today we have Dr. Chris Kenobi. He's an ophthalmologist, and we are going to talk about some fascinating information relating to seed oils. We have this trend of omega-6 fatty acid seed oils, and it's been trending like seed oils compared to
我
sugar
静音
because
以后
people
还有
think
没有
that
声音呢
no, sugar's trending going up, and
以
that's
后就没有声音了，
I
刚才停了一
？OK，
下。
that's true. First of
稍
all,
等一
thanks for
下
having me
啊。
on, Eric. And yes, so this is the work that I've been doing for the last the relationship between the trend of the consumption of seed oils. Today we have Dr. Chris Kenobi. He's an ophthalmologist, and we are going to talk about some fascinating information relating to seed oils. We have this trend of omega-6 fatty acid seed oils, and it's been trending like crazy high. Can you tell us the relationship between the trend of the consumption of seed oils compared to sugar? Because people think that, no, sugar is trending going up, and that's the culprit, but I don't think that's true. First of all, thanks for having me on, Eric. And yes, so this is the work that I've been doing for the last about 13 years, deeply investigating seed oil, the industrial seed oils and their connection to overweight, obesity, diabetes, and almost all this chronic disease. And this is what you just mentioned. I'm so glad you brought this up first. I'm looking here because I'm going to try to give you the exact data on this to answer this question. So people say, yes, they think sugar is the driver of all of this. And I am entirely convinced of that the opposite is true. Not that sugar is healthy. It's definitely a nutrient deficient food, but let me get right to this data so I don't waste anybody's time. So I want to give you the most compelling evidence right off the bat is, so most of our sugar consumption, and everything I will say or mention will come from published evidence. So most all of our sugar consumption in the United States, which we've published and Stefan Guillenet has published, the increase came before 1922. So by 1922, we were already at 473 calories worth of sugar. And up to 1987, that barely changed. It went up to 497 calories. So, right, 24 calories difference, I think that.
From 1920 to
From 1922 to 1987, yeah, sugar consumption was a flat line. And you'll see the data if you bring this in this graph that I'll send you. But during that time, so we've looked at obesity, and obesity was 1.1% in men age 18 to 80 in the late 19th century. That's Scott Allen Carson's work. So and then the next data was 1960 for obesity, which was 13%, 13.4 basically. And so we interpolate the data between those. So that's done through Excel. Anyway, so obesity was 2.95% in 1922, but it increased to 18.6% in 1987. So obesity increased over sixfold, while the sugar changed virtually not at all. It went up 5%. So this is a 65-year period of time. So if you're going to say sugar is the driver of this, how do you account for this? Because this is a 65-year period of time in history where we know sugar basically didn't change. Now it's gone up on either end of those years somewhat. We can get into more detail about that. So let's talk about the vegetable oil. So the vegetable oil introduced in the United States in 1866 has climbed all the way through 2010. So we went from 0 to 80 grams per person per day by 2010. And in 1922, the vegetable oil consumption was 78 calories per person per day. And that increased to 1987 to 497 calories.
So just to kind of recap that data,
Yes.
We're talking about, if you type in with ChatGPT about seed oils, it says, oh yeah, the average person has about 20 grams. No, it's 80 grams, which is basically about, 1/3 of our calories, isn't it? We're
Yes.
almost like 25%, or 1/3 of our calories,
Yeah.
which is about a half of a cup. No, is it a third of a cup? It's a lot of seed oils.
Yes, it is.
It's not this 20 grams.
Between 1922 and 1987, sugar went up 5%. Vegetable oils went up 605%.
God.
Obesity increased 6.3-fold, or 532%. This is a 65-year period. And if you want, I could mention the evidence on diabetes. It's even more compelling, the increase in diabetes during this period. Do you want me to mention that?
Yeah, because I don't think people realize how a fat, an oil, can cause diabetes, because they're always thinking blood sugars, but
Right.
I'm sure you can tell us what's going on there.
Right, we can get to that. So the evidence on diabetes, so diabetes was, so it's incredibly rare in 1890. This is published by Sir William Osler. Diabetes affected 0.0028% of the population. Now it rose all the way to 13% of the population by 2016. That is a 4,643-fold increase in diabetes. But let's just let's go back to 1922 to 1987. So we're looking at the exact same time frame we were looking before. Diabetes increased from about 0.09% in 1922 to 2.6% in 1987. It's gone up a whole lot more since then. How big of an increase is this? 2,800% increase in diabetes, a 29-fold increase during this 65-year period. So obesity went up 6-fold, diabetes went up 29-fold during this 65-year period when sugar did not change. So and I've got this evidence all over many other countries all over the world. It is everywhere I look. So far, I'm seeing evidence like this where you've got sugar and even carbohydrates flat or going down even. And the data gets more interesting if you look more recently, since 1999, that sugar's a bit on the decline, while our obesity and diabetes rates have escalated exponentially.
It's day coincidence. I mean, when you analyze data, you want a trend, you want to look at comparison from one date to another, and this is smoking gun, and this is it.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically, when someone consumes seed oils, and of course, they call them vegetable oils.
Mm-hmm.
They even have pictures of vegetables, right? So you have these wonderful vegetables, but those are not in here. And it's heart, they actually can put heart healthy. We'll get into that. What's the mechanism causing diabetes in a kind of a simple way? How would you explain that?
Yeah, the very simple one sentence answer is that they're driving mitochondrial dysfunction.
Okay.
So the way that if we get into a little bit more detail is that the seed oils that are rich in omega-6 fats accumulate in our body fat, and these omega-6 fats and omega-3 they're polyunsaturated, so they're prone to oxidation. And so when these fats they accumulate in your body fat, then they're prone to oxidation, which inside the body, as you always say, it's very equivalent to rusting. And inside the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of our cells, there is damage to what's called a cardiolipin molecule, which ultimately is an important part of the electron transport chain.
There's something that it targets specifically in the mitochondria as this fat is being turned into energy and into the storage of ATP. Are you saying that? Well, first of all, can we use this oil as energy?
Yes, absolutely.
We can.
We burn it. Yes.
Okay, so but in the process, because it is the way it is, it basically damages something in our mitochondria, which then doesn't allow us to make the final product of energy.
Well, it's not in the process of burning the omega-6s. It's the fact that they're incorporated into these structures, these molecules,
Okay.
and in the cardiolipin, and then they become oxidized because they're prone to be, they're subject to attack by free radicals.
So do they go into the membrane?
Yes, and then that membrane becomes leaky, and that inner mitochondrial membrane, and it leaks the hydrogen protons, which have to create a gradient in order to.
So let me just unpack
ATP.
that a little bit, because that's a little complex.
Yeah.
So if you take the membranes around, I have a cell. We have a membrane around the cell. It's this outer cutting, and then on the inside of the cell, where there's a mitochondria, there are these little things right here, and they have membranes around them, little saran wrap type things. If you even stretched out, I don't know if you've ever calculated the surface area of just the cell membrane.
Mm-hmm.
If you take the number of cells and you stretch them out, the surface area comes to 90 acres, which is like, what? So there's this huge surface area, and this is how the mitochondria makes energy, because it starts to creates this difference with certain things on one side versus another, kind of like a battery, and then you have voltage and this whole thing. So that membrane is essential for creating electricity and power to be able to store energy. So in other words, this fat gets into that membrane, and now it kind of starts leaking, and then now we lose the power. It's kind of like having a car, and you loosen one side of the bolt on the frame. It's like now we don't have that stability, right? It's just like flying all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great analogy.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting.
And then I'll just mention too that the accumulation of these omega-6 fatty acids in our bodies, they ultimately drive not only this pro-oxidative environment, but it's also pro-inflammatory. It's directly toxic through what are called advanced lipid oxidation end products, and it's nutrient deficient. You don't get any vitamins A, D, or K2 in the vegetable oils, no matter even the good ones. You don't get any vitamins A, D, or K2. So I always say these are the 4 pillars of hazard, and you put these together, and you just have the recipe for metabolic disaster and physical degeneration. Back to, well, what's driving obesity? Well, part of it is that you've disabled or caused dysfunction in the mitochondria, and you can't burn fuel properly, and so then your energy consumption, that your energy production in your own body goes down. And at the same time, you want to eat more when you consume the vegetable oils.
You're probably trying to get more energy because you're not making energy.
Absolutely.
To talk about the this mitochondria, we have a little assembly line of taking this food, and you have the glucose, the fats, and the amino acids. It's going through this assembly line, this factory, and it's extracting energy, or called electrons, right, from there, and then other things it's extracting. But in school they don't really teach you. There's like 8 different steps, but they don't really tell you or emphasize that the cofactors to allow from one enzyme to go to the next. So those are all vitamins and minerals and things like that. So
Right.
I think what you're saying is that when you consume something in a refined form like this, you're not going to get the nutrients. So now the body has to pull from reserve, from creating deficiencies as you consume this. The same thing with, like, even if you did sugar, but you're creating deficiencies as you're burning the fuel. And then when you run out, now we have a problem, because now these enzymes can't work. And then but this actually lodges into the membranes, right? It actually gets stuck in there for
Exactly.
some time.
That is such a great point, Eric, because so many people just overlooking the fact that especially we're so deficient in minerals, and these minerals, as you said, they're the cofactors of all these enzymes. If you can't run these enzymes, it's just like, as you use an analogy about a car. Well, if parts of your engine are not functioning, there's going to be an overall problem with power output, and then all sorts of things start failing. And in our bodies, this is where we start gaining weight. We start becoming insulin resistant, which means that your body doesn't respond to insulin, then your glucose goes up, and you're just poisoning yourself with these. These are what I call chronic metabolic biological poisons. Short answer is, these are poisons.
When seed oils were first introduced into the diet, I think, weren't they I think in the book, if I remember correctly, they were kind of like, well, what are we going to do with this waste product, because they're using for something else? Oh yeah, let's put it in the food supply. I mean, what happened at that point?
Yeah, so well, cottonseed oil was the first manufactured seed oil in the United States. We didn't up through 1865. There wasn't any seed oils in the food supply. There was a fraction of a gram of olive oil available. Almost no one had access to olive oil in the United States. Some in California, but anyway. So the cottonseed oil was initially, before it was in the food supply, it was used as machine oil and lamp oil primarily. Then it was used as fertilizer, and then as cattle feed. But right in there, as they started using it as fertilizer and cattle feed, they decided that they wanted to sell it as food. And Americans didn't want any part of that, because they knew it as machine oil and lamp oil. I mean, it'd be like, giving us motor oil as food and saying, here you go, eat this. And they didn't want any part of it. So manufacturers were not deterred. They just decided to start adulterating. Well, first they mixed the seed oils, the cottonseed oil, with butter to make margarine. They called oleomargarine back in that day. And then that began to work. So then they began to adulterate olive oil with it, and they sent huge amount, I think it was 55,000 barrels of so-called olive oil to Europe. And the French made complaint in 1880, because they knew just by the taste it was not olive oil. And that it was like half or something like that vegetable oil. And then eventually, by 1909, or in the early 1900s, Procter & Gamble began to produce Crisco, trans fats, which is created by bubbling hydrogen gas through this cottonseed oil at that time in the presence of a nickel catalyst. And so they produced this product that looked kind of like lard, and that's what the goal was. So the whole goal with these was to make money. It wasn't because they were healthy. The goal was to make money. It was to outsell butter and lard with these oils somehow. And that's what they did. And they were extremely successful. And there was a lot of money in it. So we got cottonseed oil initially. And then in 1909, soybean oil entered the food supply. And we got all the rest. So now today we've got soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, and peanut oils. Those are my list of sort of the worst that now account for, as of 2010 anyway, 80 grams per person per day, which we talked about earlier, is 720 calories worth, 32% of U.S. caloric consumption. So even if you take, there's going to be a little bit of plate loss there. So it's at least a fourth, if not a third, of the American diets coming out of these gigantic factories that look like petroleum refineries.
And then parallel to that campaign, they have to invalidate the saturated fats.
Yes.
And what I think it's fascinating to me, when you look at any type of junk food, right? Whether it's this or the goldfish,
Yeah.
or even used to be my favorite. If you look at these, I say, well, saturated fats are junk foods. They're in the junk. No, they're not. I actually looked at all these, and there's very little saturated fats. It's all unsaturated fats, which is fascinating to me because that's kind of like a downplayed point that ultra-processed food calories are just a tremendous amount of unsaturated fats, and people think, oh, that must be healthier, but no.
It's just exactly. It's just the opposite. They're very, very unhealthy. And yes, all of the processed foods are using seed oils. You try to find a processed food that has butter or lard or beef tallow in it. You just will hardly ever find any. So I don't know how many tens of thousands, if not maybe hundreds of thousands of processed foods and restaurant foods that are all laced with, they're just loaded with vegetable oils.
So when my wife, she cooked something, like shrimp, and there was olives in there and feta cheese, and I ate it. I didn't sleep that night, and the next morning I'm like, I normally sleep good. What's going on? So I went to see where she got those olives and that feta cheese. It was in a container filled with, I think it was canola oil. I'm like, not even olive oil. I'm like, canola. I just basically consumed probably a half a cup of canola oil, and I'm like, wow, my body does not do well on that stuff.
Yeah.
But they hide it in so many different products, even you would think to be olive oil in there, but there's not. And even like when you buy feta cheese in these little glass bottles, and you're like, wow, see. So in other words, you have to read the labels. You have to, restaurants, you'd have to ask them what oils, but people need to start, reading labels.
Yeah, you have to be extremely vigilant in order to get seed oils out of your diet. So if you eat in restaurants or you eat processed foods, it's all danger zone because they're generally just loaded with the vegetable oils. And people are very confused that so many people will say, well, I don't put any vegetable oils in my food, and you don't need to. You can get your 80 grams a day without ever buying a bottle of vegetable oil. You just eat processed foods and you eat restaurant foods, and you'll have it. You'll get that much.
I was at the health hacking event a couple weeks ago, and someone said, let's go to this restaurant that's pretty good. And I noticed that they emphasize they don't use seed oil. So I'm like, I have to get their business card to find out. Wow. I'm like, tell people to go there. But I think what I want to do is start promoting or recommending restaurants that don't give these seed oils, because I think that would be a completely new thing that I would love to go to. And then you could go there and know that everything all on the menu is no seed oils, because it's so insidious in our food supply. This is crazy.
And there's actually a couple of apps, or at least one. I think there's 2 apps now that will direct people to restaurants that do not use seed oils. And
really,
unfortunately, Eric, I don't know the name of those apps.
I'll find them and put them in the description.
Yeah, those would be excellent for people to find some of those restaurants. There's precious few restaurants that don't use seed oils, but they are learning this from us. They're getting it from people like me and you.
So I guess I didn't know this, but you clarified something. In the fat cell, there's a lot of saturated fat, there's cholesterol. I did not know that these polyunsaturated fats went into the fat cells, and I didn't know that we can actually even burn them. I guess we can, but with a package, with a price to pay.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, ultimately, with these fats from the omega-6 and omega-3, they're meant to be in very specific places in our body. But if you just eat them in overload, which we do when we're consuming seed oils, they do, as I mentioned, they accumulate in our body fat and in our cell membranes and intermitochondrial membranes. They're accumulating everywhere that you have fat, in proportion to the amount that you ate. And the half-life of these fatty acids in your body is 600 to 680 days. So you can round it off, it's about 2 years. So when people quit consuming vegetable oils, it will take about 3 years to get those entirely out of your body. That's how long it'll take.
Well, you're
You'll
talking
notice
maybe
a lot
3
of-
years before it turns into half of what it was, right?
Well, incredibly, yeah. Because of pharmacology, I was under the impression when I first learned this that it would take 5 half-lives to get them out of your body. But there is a paper that showed that if you do all the math, the authors figured this out. This was decades ago. They figured out that you can overturn all of your fatty acids in 3 years, even though the half-life is 600 to 680 days of these fatty acids. So that's kind of good and bad news. The good news is that you'll eventually get there. The bad news is it might take you 3 years, to completely get your fats in your body down to ancestral levels, was what I call it, because they're extremely high today.
Incredible. It's right now, what I'm doing is I'm trying to broaden my educational materials to the average person on the street, to get them aware of what they're eating. So we have a whole simple campaign to get people to start reading labels. So we go in their pantry, we go in their refrigerator, and we get them. First of all, we teach them, how to identify at least 3 things in this junk food, the synthetic sugars, synthetic starches, and the seed oils. And then we go to the grocery store, and then we start reading labels. And it's interesting. It takes, quite a few of those labels before all of a sudden they get it and they go, wow, I've never even read a label before. And they're just looking around amazed for the first time. They're recognizing that it's hard to find quality food in the grocery store, which is a huge step up. Because they didn't even know that they didn't even know. But then a month later, we just come back and we interview them. Once they have some key knowledge on that, it's like they're not going back because they feel so much better. The inflammation goes down.
Exactly.
You start cutting out the seed oils.
Right.
I mean,
and I hadn't really thought about this till this moment, but one of the easiest ways to get seed oils out of your diet is just not to buy anything that has a label. I mean, if you buy meats, eggs, essentially, I guess, dairy, cheese, but all the fruits and vegetables, all those, a whole lot of those things don't come with labels, right? And so those are the things that really wouldn't have any vegetable oils because they're not processed.
That would be an easy way. I like that. That's real simple.
Yeah, it might make it pretty simple for most. If they just think, first of all, all natural foods are never going to have seed oils. So this is why all of the hunter-gatherer type populations who never have seed oils in their diet. Of course, they also don't have sugar or refined flours, but they never have obesity. They have no diabetes, no heart disease, almost no cancer. Right? Their health is just extraordinary.
Now you brought up another question I have. So let's just take, I don't know, 1 teaspoon of this. How many seeds does it take to make 1 teaspoon? I mean, I'm sure it's not 1-to-1. There's not a lot of oil in these seeds.
Yeah, unfortunately, Eric, I can't remember those numbers, but it would, it would be. I know people. Maybe you've even done it. Talked about how many ears of corn it takes to make a tablespoon or so of corn oil, and it's extraordinary.
I'm going to do a video on that. I think that would be an interesting topic. You know, I did recently search out how much it costs to buy a metric ton of dent corn, which is inedible, field corn.
Oh,
and that's basically what ends up in all of our food. You can right now, actually, as of last month anyway, you could buy it for $198, a metric ton of corn,
wow.
which then can produce, I think it was up to almost 7,000 boxes of cornflakes. So the profitability on corn, because it's subsidized, is so great. I mean, what a great business to get into if you have an evil purpose, because it's just so bad. And I think also, I mean, they can make also starches and then oil. You know, it's like you could just turn that into anything. But I don't know. When I look at corn, and I just even envisioning chewing corn, I don't see a lot of oil coming out of there. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but
no, you wouldn't. In 2014, I looked at the data on the cost of seed oils globally, and it averaged exactly $1 per kilo, per 1,000 grams of seed oil. So I did the math. So again, since we were consuming 80 grams of seed oils in 2010, and it's really similar since then, it's really close to that. That 80 grams would cost, if it's soybean oil, which is the most popular oil in the United States by far, that would cost processed food manufacturers 5.6 cents. That's why they use it. If they were to use butter instead, it would cost 36 cents. So it's about 6 times more costly to put butter in a product, which would make it healthy, than it would to put in seed oils. So if you think about it, like, you know, to make Pop-Tarts, you need vegetable oil, refined flour, and sugar, right? And for 10 cents, they probably can make Pop-Tarts that cost $3 or $4, you know? And that's what processed food is, no matter where you look, whether it's whether it's pizza or Pop-Tarts or chips, they're all, you know, containing a lot of the same ingredients: refined flour, sugars, and seed oils.
You pay 3 times. You pay taxpayers, you pay certain farmers to grow that crop. So you just paid for it. And then you buy the product, and then you have to pay the doctor for all the side effects you get from it. So it might sound like you're saving money, but I don't think you are saving money.
No, I really think that if you spend the extra money to get healthy food free of processed foods in the first place, it definitely will cost you a bit more. I don't know exactly what that number would be, but it'll cost you more than the same caloric content for processed foods, for certain. But I think in the end, it could save you 1,000-fold. I'm making up that number, but when I look at people what's being spent at the end of life with heart disease and cancer care and autoimmune disease care, it's so common for these people to have bills that are beyond $20,000 a month to take care of them, right?
You're an ophthalmologist. You studied the eye, and this is probably you got well, I know this. You got interested in the seed oils just from looking at macular problems, right? Is that how you stumbled on this?
It was the other way around. I really started looking at processed foods and all this chronic disease. That was where I was back in 2013, about 11 years ago. And then that year, Eric, I did hypothesize just to myself that possibly processed foods might also be driving age-related macular degeneration, AMD, the leading cause of irreversible vision loss and blindness in people over the age of 50 worldwide. And I ultimately did leave practice to pursue that very question, to pursue the research on that. and we looked at data in 25 nations, and every single nation, the data completely supported the hypothesis that it's mostly vegetable oils and probably sugar and refined flour, the processed foods driving macular degeneration, but the overwhelming, I'll say cause, I use the term loosely, because I hate to use just association or correlation, because we all want to know what the cause is, right? And I think, so I would say the cause is the vegetable oils. And that's why eventually then I just came back to my roots, which was start looking at this in relation to obesity and metabolic disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and all this, right? And so that's kind of where I've been over the last 6 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. This is awesome. So I'm definitely going to recommend everyone get this book right here. I'll put a link down below, because this is like the Bible of seed oils. Everything you want to know about it, but it's just fascinating. All the data. I don't know how you compile this data, because this is a major project. I mean, like, I'll do a video. I know what it takes to put into one video, but you did this masterpiece. It's like this is like a work of art. I mean, just the amount of data and correlation and research. I mean, I don't know how you did it, but I'm glad you did it. And so now it's all summarized for someone.
Yeah, well, I'm a data junkie. I just kind of live and die by data. I figure that, data is where data doesn't tell you the answers, but it leads you to the answers, I think, as if it's good data. And so
yeah,
I think it's just extremely important to paint these pictures for all of us, because I learned from it too. And I'm just like everybody else. I just want to know what are the right answers? What are the true answers?
Mm-hmm.
You do that every day in your work, Eric. But I mean, I've been working on this for about 13 years now, and I just love trying to figure it out. I just like the investigation, and I want to bring this knowledge to the people.
You isolated something that I really think is the key to the whole thing. So you stumbled on something really big, and we just need to get the word out. So hopefully this video will be seen by many people, and hopefully shared by many as well.
That'd be great, Eric. Thanks a million.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
时间过了一些哈，那我们现在回到百叶经。你好，法真师傅，你们是代谢这边的，因为我们是从代谢这边过来的。那我们从代谢，我们知道了那个细胞，知道了粒线体，知道了这些循环。那他今天说的这些，就是我又在这里面，就是我们是植物有时候损害我们的粒线体啦。我们的粒线体它被损害以后，我们的能量得不到发挥，在身体里面堆积着，然后就像生锈一样，然后我们身体又缺乏能量，又觉得能量不足，然后就要吃更多，然后这些的话，那个植物油啊，植物油在我们身体里面代谢的话，他说要3年呐，要3年才能代谢出来了，所以他从数据上来看，他说，这个增长的倍数就是这个图表，开始就给我们看图表嘛，植物油的增加跟这个肥胖的增加，然后糖尿病的增加是成正比的，这几条线是跟着上的，平行的跟着上的。好，我们现在回到百叶经。第7、第8。生糯母啊，昨天这个生糯母这个我们听完了吧？然后现在开始到第9个吧。第9个，Maggie。
好的，第9个宝光天子，宝珠供塔， 报为天子，亦是佛在舍卫城有天子名曰宝光，财富圆满，浑身上下以众宝璎珞严饰，光芒四射。一天晚上，宝光天子到世尊所居圣地给孤独园，以各种鲜花供养世尊，顶礼求法。世尊观察他的根戒意乐，传语相应之法。他以智慧金刚摧毁了萨迦耶剑，正得预留果之后，返回天界。当时许多前后夜精进不眠的比丘见到世尊居处光芒普照，推测是第10天大梵天或四天王来此谥礼世尊，贺礼世尊。Is that right? 次日，诸比丘请问世尊，昨晚是否第10天大梵天或四天王天等来朝礼世尊？世尊言不是。乃身具宝光，遣除黑暗的宝光天子来到无所，祈求传法，得受相应之法后，获证圣果，复返天界。众比丘又请问世尊：宝光天子以何善业，今为天子，身具宝光，据世尊前求法得果？佛告诸比丘：这是往昔的善业良愿成熟之故。众生所做之业不会长寿于外界的地水火风上，只会承受在自己的愿界处上。即所谓纵经百千劫所作业不亡，因缘会遇时果报还自受。贤劫人寿2万岁时，人天导师如来正等觉迦叶佛出世，当时印度有位施主妇孺多闻天子，施主对迦叶佛巨大信心，将迦叶佛的指甲和头发放在塔里常做供养，并在塔上装饰各种光芒四射的宝珠，僧众们常借此光做事。他修建经堂，供养迦叶佛及僧众，归三宝，手持境界。临终时，因众发愿，以此功德，愿我生生世世财富圆满，身具宝光，于释迦世尊教法下正果。当时的施主即宝光天子，往昔的愿力成熟，如今身具宝光，财富圆满，于我教法下得证圣果。哇哦！
哇，太厉害，太硬是真的。
太厉害了，丹普萨，这个是
嗯，
一定要临终时候的发愿才好用吗？
那平时他因为什么说临终时发愿呢？因为这昨天的那录音里面不是讲到吗？就是说他发愿是个种子，种子是个空壳，他因他的功德愿力啊，他做那么多，他临终的时候，他把他这一辈子做的这些，你看啊，他说愿我就是说，以此功德，他把他，因为他这时候临终了以后了，他这一辈子，就是说他这一生所做的事，他这时候不就停止了吗？那就截止了。截止了的时候，他就一个书轮，把这一辈子所做的功德，你看以此功德，是不是啊？那个就是前面那个美女啊，然后啊圣罗摩那些，他们都是在就是说啊，那好，就是说这一辈子所做的功德全部都发愿到填注到这个愿里面了。
哦哦，
愿我生生世世财富圆满，身具宝光，然后于释迦世尊教法下正果。那昨天你记得昨天的录音里面吗？是不是说我们发愿要用功德力去填注啊？你做了多少，你这个种子多饱满，那很快就成熟啊。那他就把这辈子所做的功德全部加到这个里面去了。前面几个都是这样子啊，
是的，所以我就
记得吗？
问了，这怎么都要在临终时候才可以？OK，
那我们现在发愿了，就是说我们现在发愿了，那你做一点就填一点，你做一点就填一点，就是说你那个愿，你那愿什么时候被你填饱填满了以后，那不就马上就果报嘛，现钱了嘛？我们现在所做的就是，呃，做一点，然后就赶紧发愿，就填入到哪个里面去啊？
是
好，这里译者就是那个索达基啊，是索达基吧？他们说，我们学院中有些人在暗处路口等 装灯照亮行人，可能借此功德以后也转为光明天者，所以供佛、供僧、供塔，并以珍宝等装饰，其功德无量。以后哪位愿意积功德，可以在佛像前或经堂里供莲花灯或酥油灯等，其善果不可思议。然后这里这个他的上师如意宝说发愿很重要，愿力不可思议。我的传承弟子都应发愿往生极乐世界，他们这样发普贤行愿品的愿，这样往生极乐世界非常殊胜容易，然后度众生也方便。在此有许多校正，不再赘述。好，那我们再听听录音啊，第9的录音啊。
该如应发愿的地方，最好呢，都能完成。再一个，对于释迦如来最初成阿耨多罗三藐三菩提的时候，这几个法会道场，大家呢也略微记忆一下，都是那样殊胜不可思议的。
6位国王及眷属看着他姗姗远去的背已都大失所望，又觉得如此绝世迷。
自身成就非常快速，自身成就非常快速。他们都是为了离苦得乐，为了脱离生死出轮回，他们都是这样愿心。那么呢，他们都会快速的成就。它不像我们大乘啊，我们学华严经的时候，大乘菩萨
这是第几个？
当时发生在释迦如来做事的时候，这个嘎西美女的事。那么我们也知道，她过去在迦舍佛那儿就已经出家了。那这里面牵扯到一个我们百业经里大部分的成就都是阿罗汉，这又是为什么呢？这与他们现的这个声闻相有直接关系，他们现的这个声闻相有直接关系。因为现声闻相呢，好多都要延续的声闻教法。声闻教法呢，偏向于小乘，但是呢，它也有立足于大乘的这些点，你比如说这个起实啊，那么为什么要起实呢？我们看一看南传佛教，经常看到南传佛教，都是还在延续的佛陀住世的时候那个规则，就是寺院内不许有做饭的地方，也不许储藏这些个米呀、菜呀，那必须每天都要端着钵到外面乞食。乞食目的是什么呢？实际上就是化来众生于诸佛的因缘。为什么呢？因为这些出家相，剃着光光头，披着袈裟，就是当年佛陀的形象。那别人供养你，就等于供养一切诸佛了。所以说呢，那个从这一点上来讲，它是外现声闻相，内密菩萨行了。真正来讲呢，取着无量众生与诸佛建立这种因缘。但是呢，它有好多都是趋向于阿罗汉。这个阿罗汉也不是什么不符合佛法的，就是他自身成就非常快速，他们都是为了离苦得乐，为了脱离生死出轮回，他们都是这样愿心。那么呢，他们都会快速的成就。它不像我们大乘啊，我们学华严经的时候，大乘菩萨 大乘菩萨要以一切众生为根本，并不是自己成就什么。也就是大乘菩萨从来没有想自己成就什么，都是看众生需要什么。那么大乘菩萨所有的一切成就，都是为了想利益众生，因为众生需要他去做这些事。所以说呢，他这是两个渠道，两个概念。大乘菩萨呢是以一切众生为主的，不是考虑个人什么出离生死不出离生死，出离轮回不出离轮回的事。那么小乘呢，是直接的要出离生死、出离轮回的事，不管其他的什么众生不众生。那么所以说呢，他们延续的这个出家相受的一些教法都是声闻教法。声闻教法呢都讲究快速的出离三界，出离轮回。所以说他们发愿呢都是以阿罗汉为标准的，因为阿罗汉已经出离了轮回，出离了三界。那么我们在这个因果经典里注重要学的是什么呢？我们在这些因果经典里注重要学的是什么？就是把这个因果搞清楚，就是要把这些因果搞清楚。你比如说，那他这些个现在的所有成就都是哪儿来的？比如说我们今天所学这个嘎西美女，她现在这些所有成就哪儿来的呢？是过去从来没有因，现在就忽然间结果了吗？不是的，是早在贤劫人寿8万岁的时候，迦摄佛做事的时候，他那个时候已经把因种下了，而且他发愿是在释迦佛教法下出家成就，所以说呢，他必然会在释迦佛教法下出家成就的。当时因是什么，最后的果就是什么了。好了，另外再看看大家的问题。有的人说太辛苦了，都睡着了，在忏悔。是啊，在家菩萨总要辛苦一些了。好，行者在问，他说：“师父，二果罗汉再来还退转吗？不可能再退转了，不可能再退转了。要能退转就不叫二果了，那能退转的连一果都不能叫了，能退转的连一果都不能叫了。因为我们从初果，我们说。”就像《百业经》里的原话，我们以金刚智慧破除了所有的邪见。什么叫金刚智慧呢？就是不坏的智慧。什么叫不坏智慧呢？也就是说，一旦这个智慧成就了，他时时守着这个智慧，其他的所有邪见出现的时候全部被他一脚踢开。那他时时的守着这个智慧，守着解脱智慧，那从初果来看，他已经不能再退转了，退不下去了。那二果，你说他还能退转吗？不可能再退了。那能退转就初果就不叫已经成就了金刚智慧，就是不坏的智慧。好，换者我再问。说世尊，以何因缘嘎西美女生帝王之家？又以何因缘相好庄严？以何因缘于释迦如来教法下生大信心，速证圣果？佛说这是他往昔的愿力。那我们要知道，生帝王之家这是正常的事了，因为他过去是修行人呐。那修行人这点愿望还实现不了吗？实际他的愿小了，愿发多大都会成就的。他当时发这些愿多小了，所以说他愿生这种帝王之家，愿意记住这些，都是他过去愿力所致。 好，冰心玉洁说师傅，烧香剩下的香梗应该如何处理啊？那个你怎么处理都行的。因为那个呢不是你在供养的范畴之内，你供养香这是点燃以后的那个香那是你要供养的，那剩下的香梗那不是你要供养的东西你可以做废品扔掉了。是的，患主又打出来了，这一段非常重要，就是他的前因呢，就是他以前在迦舍佛那儿出家以后，临终前呢，他发愿我一生中的布施供养持戒闻思等等所有功德，能于生生世世中生于富贵家，相貌庄严，并能于释迦佛教法中出家证阿罗汉果。是啊，他这个什么因，最后一定会成就什么样果的。谦公说借父母的力量，他修建了一座经堂，供养佛及僧也行吗？那有什么不行的？那有什么不行的呢？虽然说他是借父母力量，但是他父母没有这个心呢。他有一个心呢，他有修经堂的心。那么父母给他修这个经堂，也不是他父母为了想自己成就什么，想得好，他只是想满他女儿的愿。所以说呢，那只能他女儿得这个利益当然能行了。你也不妨做一做试试，一定可以的。67128他说，能否有先出能轮回成就以后再回来度众生的可能呢？当然有了。就像地藏经上所讲，两个小国王，一个呢发愿成佛以后再来度众生，就是一切自成就如来；还有一个发愿先利益一切众生，随后再成佛，就是地藏菩萨。当然可以了。好，走出再说，他说听说有家庭的人呢，出家要配偶同意，或者拿离婚证才行，请问是这样的吗？我想出家，他不同意，也是我的愿。报恩呢，继续的读一下。
想到王女，后来第二者
他们在过去已经种好因了，那遇到迦舍佛，他一定可以结果的。但是呢，他们在迦舍佛那儿出家也是一件好事，因为他们毕竟修持了很多功德，而且也发了这些殊胜的愿。他们发愿愿意将来在释迦佛教法下出家，能让佛欢喜。那大家有没有发过愿让佛欢喜的愿呢？就说我们一言一行一举一动都能让佛欢喜我们有没有发过这样的愿呢？我们有没有发愿将来也成阿罗汉或者说呢，我们要做菩萨，我们发愿将来成佛道快速的成佛道，这些都可以考虑了。记住，只要你有因，必然最后会结果的。好，幻主又把那个打出来了，他说以今生布施出家之功德，愿我们生生世世财富圆满，生于贵族王家，直释迦世尊出世，令佛欢喜。依佛的教法中一起出家，证阿罗汉果。他们两个这样发愿呢，最后他们都一一的兑现了。好，冰心一劫他说愿能得一切轻举身以及殊胜功德，善能普入一切佛刹，愿我和一切众生获得无边无际的善巧神足，于一切世界 普现其身，嘿，这个好。那将来你就不是往生西方极乐世界了，就是所有的世界你都可以去了。而且呢，也就是说一个你冰心玉洁会化现无数个你，每一个你都是一个你，都和你现在一样去完成你这些愿，非常殊胜，非常好。灵光说：虽有米却无锅。阿弥陀佛，师父，有米还未得下锅，因缘机会才能正果啊，师父。是啊，看样子你对坛经六祖大师的话很有研究啊。那六祖大师曾经说过，米熟了，犹欠筛在，非常好，是这样的。好，另外我们还看到前面67128说入世比出家苦，你认同吗？我太认同了，我绝对认同，120个认同了，那是绝对的了，绝对的了。就像顺治皇上那个出家寄送所说的那样，100年36000日，不及生家半日闲。那苦多了，也够忙的了，什么苦都有，3苦、8苦、无量诸苦。我非常赞同这个话，看样子你有很深的认识啊，很不错，非常好。好，我把这个悄悄话公开了就好了，自忏的有点提醒。是啊，再以后大家多提醒一点，以免我这个记忆力不好，总忘了这个大家的利益。那大家已经知道了重音。
好，今天我们这个录音听到40分钟这里，因为这个录音好像前面这些我们已经听过了，那我今天在放的时候，我不记得听到哪里了。40分钟，我们明天继续从40分钟这里开始听了哈。在几个录音放在一起，这里7、8、9吧，几个录音放在一起，然后明天继续从40分钟再听哈。
好的。
今天时间到，刚安排给刚把这是否发生是否演是否 see 然后吧，所有善没有生气，上是3、8，刚的这个把它护持，